autumn air in Portland, Oregon, carried the familiar scent of rain and coffee beans as Maya Rodriguez pushed through the glass doors of Grind Coffee House on Morrison Street. The warmth inside embraced her like an old friend, and she shook the droplets from her burgundy peacoat, grateful to escape the October drizzle that seemed to follow her everywhere these days. Maya had been coming to this particular coffee shop for 3 years now, ever since she'd started her master's program in social work at Portland State University. It had become her sanctuary, a place where she could study, write, and think without the constant buzz of her shared apartment near campus. The exposed brick walls, mismatched vintage furniture, and the gentle hum of conversation created the perfect atmosphere for productivity. Today felt different, though. Maya couldn't shake the weight that had settled in her chest since her advisor's meeting yesterday. Dr. Martinez had been blunt. "Maya, your thesis on systemic barriers facing immigrant families is important work, but you're falling behind. The defense is in 6 months, and frankly, I'm concerned about your timeline." She'd been struggling not with the research itself, but with the emotional toll of interviewing families whose stories mirrored her own parents' journey from El Salvador 25 years ago. Each interview reopened wounds she thought had healed, reminded her of the whispered conversations between her parents late at night about money, about belonging, about whether they'd made the right choice in coming to America. Maya approached the counter where Tyler, a barista with kind eyes and intricate tattoos covering his forearms, greeted her with his usual smile. "The regular, Maya? Large oat milk latte with an extra shot." "Actually," Maya said, digging through her worn leather messenger bag, "make it a large cold brew today, and could you add one of those chocolate croissants? I think I need the sugar boost." Tyler nodded, his hands already moving to prepare her order. "Rough week?" Maya managed a weak smile. "Something like that, just trying to power through some writing." As Tyler worked, Maya's attention drifted to a young girl sitting at a corner table near the window. She couldn't have been more than 7 or 8 years old, with dark hair pulled back in slightly messy pigtails and wearing a purple unicorn t-shirt that had seen better days. The girl was carefully coloring in a coloring book, her tongue poking out slightly in concentration. What struck Maya most was how alone the child appeared. Her small backpack sat on the chair beside her, and she glanced occasionally toward the restroom area with the patient expression of someone who'd been waiting for a while. "That'll be $8.50, Tyler said, sliding Maya's order across the counter. As Maya reached for her wallet, a woman's voice cut through the coffee shop's ambient noise like a blade. "Excuse me, but I specifically said a small coffee, and I don't want her having too much caffeine." Maya looked toward the source of the voice and saw a woman in her 40s standing at the other end of the counter. She was impeccably dressed in a cream-colored cashmere sweater and dark jeans that probably cost more than Maya's monthly grocery budget. Her blonde hair was styled in perfect beach waves, and her makeup looked like it had been professionally applied. Everything about her screamed affluence and control. The woman was speaking to Lisa, another barista, and her tone carried an edge that made Maya's stomach tighten. Behind the woman stood a Latina woman who appeared to be in her 30s, wearing dark slacks and a simple blue blouse. Her hair was pulled back in a neat bun, and she held herself with the careful posture of someone trying to remain invisible. "I made it exactly as you requested, ma'am," Lisa replied, her voice professionally calm despite the tension Maya could see in her shoulders. "A small coffee with cream and 1 sugar." "I don't think you understand," the blonde woman continued, her voice rising just enough to draw attention from nearby tables. "She's the nanny, not a guest. She doesn't need a large coffee or any of the expensive add-ons. A basic small coffee is perfectly adequate." Maya felt her chest constrict as she watched the exchange. The Latina woman, who Maya now realized must be the nanny, stood with her eyes downcast, her hands clasped in front of her. There was something heartbreakingly familiar about her posture, the way she seemed to be trying to make herself smaller. "Mum, is Lucia okay?" came a small voice from the corner table. The little girl with the coloring book was looking over with concern, her crayon suspended mid-air. "She's fine, Emma," the blonde woman replied without looking at her daughter. "Lucia is just getting her coffee, and then we need to go. You have piano practice in an hour." Maya watched as Lisa handed over a small paper cup to the woman, who immediately passed it to Lucia without even looking at her. The nanny accepted it with a quiet "thank you" that was barely audible over the espresso machine's hissing. As the trio began to leave, Maya heard the little girl, Emma, say in a stage whisper that carried across the quiet coffee shop, "Why can't Lucia have a big coffee like you, Mom? She takes care of me all day. Doesn't she get tired too?" The blonde woman's response was sharp and just loud enough for half the coffee shop to hear. "Emma, don't question these things. Lucia is here to work, not to enjoy treats. Now collect your things." Maya felt something ignite in her chest, a familiar fire that she'd inherited from her mother, who had cleaned houses for wealthy families while putting herself through night school to become a certified nursing assistant. She recognized the careful way Lucia held herself, the practiced invisibility that came from years of navigating spaces where you were simultaneously essential and unwelcome. Without fully thinking through her actions, Maya grabbed her cold brew and quickly walked toward the exit, catching up with the family just as they reached the door. "Excuse me?" Maya called out, her voice steadier than she felt. The blonde woman turned, clearly annoyed at being delayed. "Yes?" Maya looked directly at Lucia, whose dark eyes widened with surprise. "I couldn't help but overhear that you like coffee," Maya said, extending her large cold brew toward the nanny. "I actually ordered the wrong thing. I meant to get a hot drink, but they made this cold brew instead. I hate to see it go to waste. Would you like it?" Lucia glanced quickly between Maya and her employer, uncertainty flickering across her features. The blonde woman's mouth opened as if to protest, but Maya continued before she could speak. "It's a large cold brew with a splash of cream," Maya explained to Lucia directly. "Really good on a day like today when you need the extra energy." Emma piped up from behind her mother. "That's so nice. Lucia, you should take it. You said you were tired after we went to the park." The blonde woman's face had gone red, and Maya could see her struggling between making a scene in public and maintaining her image. Finally, Lucia spoke, her voice soft but clear. "That's very kind of you. Thank you." She accepted the drink from Maya, and for a moment their eyes met. Maya saw recognition there, not of her personally, but of what she was doing and why. It was the kind of understanding that passed between people who had navigated similar waters. "Have a beautiful day," Maya said, addressing all three of them but looking primarily at Lucia and Emma. As the family left, Maya heard Emma's voice drifting back through the closing door. "Mom, why did that lady give Lucia her drink? Was she being nice?" Maya couldn't hear the response, but she didn't need to. She walked back to her table near the window, her original order forgotten, and sat down with shaking hands. The entire interaction had lasted less than 3 minutes, but it felt like something significant had shifted. Tyler appeared at her table a moment later with a fresh, cold brew. "On the house," he said quietly. "That was a good thing you did." Maya looked up at him, surprised. "You saw all that? Kind of hard to miss," Tyler replied, glancing around the coffee shop where several patrons were still watching her with expressions ranging from admiration to discomfort. "Look, I've been working in coffee shops for 5 years, and I see all kinds of interactions. What you just did, that took guts." As Tyler walked away, Maya pulled out her laptop and tried to focus on her thesis, but her mind kept drifting back to Lucia's face when she'd accepted the coffee. There had been gratitude there, yes, but also something deeper, a moment of being seen and acknowledged as a person worthy of kindness. Maya's phone buzzed with a text from her best friend, Sarah. "Still on for dinner tonight? I want to hear how the writing is going." She typed back, "Yes, but I think I have a different story to tell you." The rain continued to patter against the window as Maya finally opened her laptop and began to type. But instead of working on her thesis about systemic barriers, she found herself writing about the encounter she'd just witnessed. She wrote about the careful way Lucia had held herself, about Emma's innocent questions, and about the blonde woman's casual cruelty disguised as practicality. As she wrote, Maya began to understand something about her own research that had been eluding her. The barriers she was studying weren't just bureaucratic hurdles or language difficulties. They were moments like this, when someone's humanity was questioned or diminished in small daily interactions. They were the accumulation of tiny cuts, each one seemingly insignificant, but collectively devastating. Maya's fingers moved faster across the keyboard as she began to see connections between what had just happened and the interviews she'd been conducting. Maria, who cleaned offices downtown and spoke of being treated like furniture by the people whose spaces she maintained. Carlos, who worked construction and described how contractors would discuss him in English right in front of him, assuming he couldn't understand. Anna, who cared for elderly clients and was expected to be grateful for scraps of kindness while providing unwavering devotion. The coffee shop began to empty as the afternoon wore on, but Maya remained at her corner table, writing with a clarity that had been missing from her work for months. She wrote about the economics of care work, about the invisible labor that kept families functioning, and about the psychological toll of being treated as less than human while being trusted with what people valued most: their children, their homes, their vulnerable loved ones. When she finally looked up, the sun was setting behind Portland's downtown skyline, casting long shadows across the coffee shop. Tyler was wiping down tables, preparing to close, and Maya realized she'd been writing for nearly 4 hours straight. As she packed up her laptop, Maya thought about Lucia again. She wondered where the woman lived, whether she had children of her own waiting for her at home, what dreams she might have beyond caring for other people's families. She thought about Emma too, and hoped that the little girl's natural empathy wouldn't be trained out of her by her mother's example. Walking home through the now gentle rain, Maya felt a sense of purpose returning to her work that had been absent for weeks. The encounter at the coffee shop had reminded her why she'd chosen to study social work in the first place. Not just to understand systems of oppression, but to find ways to challenge them, even in small, everyday moments. Her apartment was quiet when she arrived, her roommates still at their evening classes. Maya made herself a simple dinner of black beans and rice, comfort food that reminded her of her childhood, and sat at her small kitchen table to review what she'd written that day. Her phone rang as she was reading, and she saw her mother's name on the screen. "Hola, mija," came her mother's warm voice. "How was your day?" "It was interesting, Mama," Maya replied, switching to Spanish as she always did when talking with her parents. "I witnessed something today that made me think of you." "Oh? What happened?" Maya told her mother about the coffee shop incident, about Lucia and the way she'd been treated. As she spoke, she heard her mother make small sounds of recognition and understanding. "Ay, mija," her mother said when Maya finished. "You did the right thing. Sometimes the smallest gestures can mean the most to someone who feels invisible." "Did you ever experience things like that when you were cleaning houses?" Maya asked, though she already knew the answer. Her mother was quiet for a moment. "Many times," she finally said, "but there were also people like you, people who saw me as human, who treated me with respect. Those people, they made it possible for me to keep going, to believe that this country could be home for us." After they hung up, Maya sat in her kitchen thinking about the interconnectedness of stories, her mother's, Lucia's, her own. She thought about Emma too, and the opportunity that existed in that little girl's questions and natural empathy. Before going to bed, Maya made a decision. She was going to expand her thesis to include not just the barriers that immigrant families faced, but also the moments of human connection that helped people navigate and overcome those barriers. She was going to write about the power of small acts of kindness and recognition, about the importance of seeing and acknowledging the humanity in everyone. As she drifted off to sleep, Maya could still see Lucia's face when she'd accepted the coffee. Surprised, grateful, and for just a moment, visible. 3 days after the coffee shop incident, Maya found herself thinking about Lucia at the most unexpected moments. While riding the bus to campus, she wondered if the nanny took public transportation or if her employer provided other transportation. During her evening jog through Laurelhurst Park, she imagined Lucia pushing Emma on the swings, probably in this very park, and wondered what they talked about during those quiet afternoon hours. The encounter had sparked something in Maya's research that she couldn't ignore. She'd spent the past 2 days reaching out to new contacts, expanding her interview pool to include domestic workers, nannies, and childcare providers. Dr. Martinez had noticed the shift during their Wednesday meeting. "Maya, I have to say, your recent writing samples show a depth of insight that was missing before," her advisor had said, adjusting his wire-rimmed glasses as he read through her latest chapter draft. This connection between individual moments of dignity and larger systemic issues, it's exactly what your thesis needed. Now, on Friday afternoon, Maya was walking toward her first interview with someone from this new demographic. Carmen Restrepo had agreed to meet at a small community center in southeast Portland, a space that served primarily Latino families in the area. The community center was housed in a converted church, its red brick facade weathered but welcoming. Inside, the smell of fresh coffee and homemade tortillas drifted from a small kitchen where volunteers prepared meals for families in need. Maya found Carmen sitting in a corner of the main room. A woman in her 50s with graying hair pulled back in a neat ponytail and hands that showed the wear of decades of hard work. "Thank you for agreeing to speak with me," Maya said as she settled into the folding chair across from Carmen. "I know your time is precious." Carmen smiled, lines crinkling around dark eyes that held both warmth and wariness. "When Rosa told me about your research, I thought it was important to participate. Not many people want to hear our stories." Rosa Gutierrez ran the community center and had been instrumental in connecting Maya with potential interview subjects. She understood the value of having someone document the experiences of immigrant workers, especially someone like Maya who spoke both languages and could navigate between worlds. "Tell me about your work," Maya began, pulling out her recorder with Carmen's permission. "How long have you been in childcare?" 15 years, Carmen replied, her voice steady but tinged with fatigue. "I came here from Colombia when my daughter was 12. Back home, I was a teacher. But here you start over, you know. I began cleaning houses, but a family I worked for needed someone to watch their children. That's how I found my calling again, in a different way." As Carmen spoke, Maya was struck by the familiar themes emerging. The professional credentials that didn't transfer, the rebuilding of identity in a new country, the finding of purpose in unexpected places. But there was something else in Carmen's story, a dignity and intentionality that challenged the narrative Maya had witnessed at the coffee shop. "The children I've cared for," Carmen continued, "they become part of your heart. I've watched babies take their first steps, helped with homework, dried tears after bad dreams. Some of these children, they're teenagers now, and they still call me, still tell me about their lives." "And the families?" Maya asked gently. "How do they treat you?" Carmen was quiet for a moment, considering. "It varies. Some families, they see you as part of their family. They ask about your life, remember your daughter's birthday, invite you to celebrations. Others," she paused, searching for words, "others see you as help. Necessary but not quite human." Maya felt her chest tighten, remembering Lucia's downcast eyes and careful posture. "Can you give me an example?" "There was one family I worked for about 5 years ago," Carmen said, her voice becoming softer. "Beautiful children, 2 little boys who called me Tia Carmen. But the mother, she would have dinner parties and introduce me as the nanny if guests asked who I was. Never my name, just my function. And when I would take the children to the park or to activities, other parents would assume I was the grandmother or just ignore me completely." Maya nodded, taking notes while maintaining eye contact. How did that make you feel? Invisible, Carmen replied without hesitation, like I was there but not there. The children would introduce me to their friends. This is Carmen. She takes care of us with such love and pride. But their mother never saw me the way they did. As the interview continued, Maya learned about Carmen's daughter, who was now a nurse at OHSU, about the small apartment they shared in a southeast Portland neighborhood where Spanish mixed with English on every street corner, and about Carmen's dreams of one day opening a small daycare center where she could use both her teaching background and her years of childcare experience. The hardest part, Carmen said as their conversation began to wind down, is not the work itself. I love the work. It's the way some people make you feel like you should be grateful for crumbs when you're giving everything you have to their most precious gifts. Maya thought about Lucia again, about the way her employer had dismissed her need for something as basic as a decent cup of coffee. Have you ever had moments where someone treated you with unexpected kindness? Small things that might not seem like much to them, but meant a lot to you? Carmen's face brightened immediately. Oh yes, many times. There was one family where the father would always greet me by name when he came home from work. He would ask about my day, not just about the children. And during my birthday one year, they gave me a day off and a gift certificate to a spa. They said I deserved to be pampered. She paused, smiling at the memory. But you know what meant the most? The mother of that family, she would correct people when they called me the babysitter. She would say, "This is Carmen. She's part of our family, and she's amazing with children." It was such a small thing, but it made me feel seen. After the interview, Maya walked Carmen to the bus stop, their conversation continuing in Spanish as they navigated the familiar dance of two people sharing similar cultural ground. As Carmen's bus arrived, she turned to Maya with a serious expression. "Mija," she said, using the term of endearment that Maya's own mother used. "Make sure when you write about us, you write about our strength too. Yes, we face challenges, but we're not victims. We're survivors, and we're building better lives for our children." Maya nodded, feeling the weight of responsibility that came with carrying other people's stories. "I promise." That evening, Maya met Sarah for dinner at their favorite Vietnamese restaurant in the Hawthorne district. Sarah was a journalism major who'd been Maya's roommate during their undergraduate years at Portland State, and she had a sharp eye for social issues that made her an invaluable sounding board for Maya's research. "You seem different," Sarah observed as they waited for their foe to arrive. "More focused, if that makes sense." Maya told her about the coffee shop incident and the interview with Carmen, about the way her research was taking on new dimensions. Sarah listened intently, occasionally asking probing questions that helped Maya clarify her thoughts. "So what are you going to do with all this?" Sarah asked as they shared spring rolls. "I mean, beyond your thesis?" "I'm not sure yet," Maya admitted. "But I keep thinking about Emma, the little girl from the coffee shop. She was asking the right questions, but her mother was teaching her to stop asking them." Sarah nodded thoughtfully. "Kids are naturally empathetic until we train it out of them." "Exactly, and I keep wondering about Lucia too. I gave her my coffee, but then what? She went back to a situation where her basic humanity is questioned daily." Their conversation was interrupted by Maya's phone buzzing with a text from an unknown number. "Hi, this is Rosa from the community center. Carmen gave me your number. I have someone else who wants to talk to you for your research. Can you call me?" Maya showed the text to Sarah, who raised an eyebrow. "Words getting around." Over the next hour, Rosa explained over the phone that Carmen had been moved by their conversation and had spoken to other women in the community about Maya's research. Several had expressed interest in sharing their stories, including domestic workers, childcare providers, and house cleaners. "There's also someone specific I think you should meet," Rosa said. "Her name is Lucia Morales. She heard about your research through a friend and asked if she could participate." Maya's heart skipped. "Lucia Morales? Does she work as a nanny in the Pearl District area?" "Yes, that's her. Do you know her?" Maya explained about the coffee shop encounter, and Rosa was quiet for a moment before speaking. "Maya, that was you. Lucia has been talking about that interaction all week. She said it was the first time in months that someone had treated her with basic kindness in front of her employer. They arranged to meet the following Monday at the community center. As Maya hung up, she felt a mixture of excitement and nervousness. She would get to hear Lucia's full story, but she also worried about crossing the line between researcher and participant. Sarah, who had been listening to Maya's side of the conversation, smiled knowingly. "Sounds like your little act of kindness is having bigger ripples than you expected." That weekend, Maya spent time with her own family, joining her parents for their traditional Saturday evening dinner at their small house in Gresham. Her father, Roberto, worked in landscaping and had built their backyard into a small oasis of fruit trees and vegetable gardens that reminded Maya of the descriptions her parents shared of their life in El Salvador. As they ate her mother's pupusas, Maya found herself asking her parents about their early years in Portland, about the people who had helped them and the ones who had hurt them. It was a conversation they'd had pieces of before, but never with the focused attention that Maya's research had given her. "Your mother was working for this one family," her father said, glancing at his wife with a mixture of pride and old pain. "Rich people in the West Hills. Beautiful house, 3 children. But they would leave notes for her about what she could and couldn't touch, like she was going to steal something." Maya's mother, Eleanor, nodded. "They would count the drinks in the refrigerator, make sure I wasn't taking anything, but their children, they loved me. The youngest one, she would save half her cookies to share with me during my lunch break." "What happened with that family?" Maya asked. "One day, the mother accused me of breaking an expensive vase," Elena said quietly. "I hadn't touched it. One of the children had knocked it over while playing, and I was the one who cleaned it up. But instead of asking what happened, she just assumed it was my fault and deducted the cost from my pay." Roberto reached across the table to squeeze his wife's hand. "That's when we knew she had to find different work. But there were good families too," Elena added quickly, always one to find balance in difficult stories. "The Johnsons, who I worked for after that. They treated me like family. When I got sick one winter, Mrs. Johnson brought me soup and insisted I take paid time off to recover. She said family takes care of family." As Maya drove home that evening, she thought about the complexity of these relationships, the way power dynamics could make the same job either dignifying or dehumanizing, depending on how the employer chose to wield their authority. She thought about Emma again, about the little girl's natural instinct to question unfairness, and wondered if there was a way to nurture that instinct instead of extinguishing it. On Sunday, Maya spent the day preparing for her interview with Lucia, reviewing her questions and thinking about how to approach the conversation. She wanted to maintain professional boundaries while acknowledging their previous encounter. Most importantly, she wanted to create a space where Lucia felt safe to share her truth. As she sat in her apartment, looking out at the Portland skyline dotted with cranes and construction, signs of a city in constant change, Maya reflected on how much her own understanding had evolved in just 1 week. The coffee shop incident had been a catalyst, but it had revealed something that was already there, a network of women whose stories deserved to be heard, whose experiences could illuminate both the challenges and the resilience that defined the immigrant experience in America. She opened her laptop and began typing notes for her upcoming interview, but found herself instead writing about the broader questions her research was raising. How many Lucias were there in Portland? How many Carmens and Elenas? And how many Emmas, children whose natural empathy could be cultivated instead of crushed? As the sun set over the Willamette River, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, Maya felt a sense of anticipation that had nothing to do with completing her thesis and everything to do with the stories still waiting to be told. Monday morning arrived with the kind of crisp October clarity that made Portland feel like a city where anything was possible. Maya arrived at the community center 30 minutes early, nervous energy making it impossible for her to sit still at home any longer. She used the extra time to help Rosa set up chairs for an English as a second language class that would meet later that afternoon. "You're anxious about seeing Lucia again," Rosa observed as they arranged the furniture. "It wasn't a question." Maya paused in her chair moving. "Is it that obvious?" "Only because I've seen it before," Rosa said gently. "When you step outside the traditional researcher role and make human connections, the work becomes more personal. It's both more powerful and more complicated." Rosa was in her 60s, with silver-streaked hair that she wore in a long braid down her back, and the kind of presence that made people instinctively trust her. She had founded the community center 15 years earlier after retiring from a career in social work, and had been instrumental in connecting immigrant families with resources ranging from legal aid to job training. "Lucia is nervous too," Rosa continued. "She's never done anything like this before, never shared her story with someone outside her community, but she said what happened at the coffee shop made her feel like maybe there were people who would listen." When Lucia arrived at exactly 10 o'clock, Maya was struck again by her quiet dignity. She wore dark jeans and a cream-colored sweater, her hair pulled back in a neat ponytail, and she carried herself with the careful posture of someone who had learned to move through the world without taking up too much space. "Thank you for agreeing to speak with me," Maya said as they settled into the small interview room Rosa had prepared for them. "I want you to know that everything we discuss will be confidential, and you can stop at any time if you feel uncomfortable." Lucia nodded, her hands folded carefully in her lap. "Rosa explained about your research. I think it's important work." Maya set up her recorder and opened her notebook, but before she could ask her first formal question, Lucia spoke again. "I wanted to thank you again for what you did at the coffee shop," she said, her voice soft but clear. "It might seem like a small thing to you, but it meant a lot to me." "It wasn't small at all," Maya replied. "And I've been thinking about that day a lot since then. Would it be okay if we started there? Could you tell me about your experience that morning?" Lucia was quiet for a moment, gathering her thoughts. "I've been working for the Harrison family for almost 2 years," she began. "Emma is a wonderful child, curious and kind, but her mother..." She paused, choosing her words carefully. "Mrs. Harrison sees me as help, not as a person." As Lucia spoke, Maya learned about her daily routine, arriving at the Harrison house at 7 each morning, preparing Emma's breakfast, walking her to school, picking her up in the afternoon, supervising homework and activities, preparing dinner for the family, and often staying until 8 or 9 in the evening when the parents returned from their social commitments. "I work about 12 hours a day, 6 days a week," Lucia explained. "Sunday is my only day off, unless they need me for something special." "And your salary?" Maya asked gently. $800 a week, Lucia said. "No benefits, no paid time off. If I get sick and can't work, I don't get paid." Maya did quick mental math that worked out to about $11 an hour for someone caring for a child, managing a household, and being available for whatever unexpected needs arose. It was barely above minimum wage for skilled, emotionally demanding work. "Tell me about your relationship with Emma," Maya said. For the first time during the interview, Lucia's face lit up. "Emma is special. She's smart and funny, and she asks questions about everything. She wants to know about my life in Mexico, about my family, about why I speak 2 languages. She's teaching me English words I don't know, and I'm teaching her Spanish." "How does Mrs. Harrison feel about that?" Lucia's expression shifted back to careful neutrality. "She doesn't like it when Emma speaks Spanish. She says it's confusing for her development, but Emma loves learning new words, and she practices with me when her mother isn't around." As the interview continued, Maya learned about Lucia's journey to Portland. She had come from Guadalajara 3 years earlier, following her sister who had found work in a restaurant downtown. Lucia had a degree in early childhood education from a university in Mexico, but like Carmen, her credentials hadn't transferred. "I love working with children," Lucia said. Back home, I taught kindergarten for 5 years. I know about child development, about creating learning opportunities through play, about nurturing emotional growth. But here, I'm not seen as an educator. I'm just the nanny. Maya felt a familiar anger rising in her chest, the same fire she'd felt at the coffee shop. Here was another accomplished woman whose expertise was being dismissed, whose value was reduced to her function rather than her skills and knowledge. What was it like at the coffee shop that day? Maya asked. Lucia's hands tightened slightly in her lap. It happens often, being treated like I don't deserve the same things as other people. Usually I ignore it because I need this job. But that day, in front of Emma, she paused. Emma was watching everything. She sees how her mother treats me, and she's starting to learn that it's normal. What do you mean? Last week, Emma was playing with dolls, and she was making one doll serve the others. She said the serving doll was just the helper and didn't need the nice things. It broke my heart because I could see she was copying what she observes at home. Maya thought about her conversation with Sarah about children's natural empathy being trained out of them. But Emma also stood up for you at the coffee shop. Yes, Lucia said, a small smile crossing her face. She has a good heart, but she's confused because she loves me. But her mother treats me like I'm less important. It's hard for a child to understand. As their conversation deepened, Lucia shared more about her daily experiences, the way delivery drivers assumed she didn't speak English, how other parents at Emma's school activities either ignored her or spoke to her in slow, loud English, even after she demonstrated fluency, and the isolation she felt despite being surrounded by people all day. The hardest part, Lucia said, is feeling invisible while being responsible for something so important. Emma's safety, her happiness, her development, it's all in my hands. But I'm treated like furniture that moves and occasionally speaks. Maya asked about Lucia's support system, her life outside of work. She learned that Lucia lived in a small apartment with 2 roommates in southeast Portland, that she sent money home to her parents in Mexico each month, and that she was slowly saving money to bring her teenage daughter to the United States. I have a 15-year-old daughter, Sophia, who lives with my mother in Guadalajara, Lucia explained, her voice becoming heavy with emotion. She's so smart, top of her class, wants to be a doctor, but it's expensive to bring her here legally, and I worry about her being alone so much while I'm working to build a life for us. Maya felt the weight of this revelation. Lucia was separated from her own child in order to care for someone else's, working long hours for minimal pay while navigating constant small humiliations and the grinding anxiety of an uncertain future. What keeps you going? Maya asked. Hope, Lucia replied without hesitation. Hope that things will get better, that I'll find a family who sees my value, that I'll save enough money to bring Sophia here and maybe go back to school to get my teaching credentials recognized. And Emma, she gives me hope too. When she shows kindness to others, when she asks thoughtful questions, I think maybe I'm making a difference in who she becomes. After the formal interview ended, Lucia lingered, seeming reluctant to leave. Can I ask you something? She said. Of course. What made you decide to do this research? Why do our stories matter to you? Maya considered how much to share about her own background, then decided on honesty. My parents came here from El Salvador when I was a baby. My mother worked as a house cleaner for years while going to school at night to become a nursing assistant. I grew up seeing how she was treated, sometimes with respect, sometimes like she was invisible. Your stories matter because they're part of a larger truth about who gets seen and valued in this country. Lucia nodded slowly. Will it make a difference, your research? I hope so, Maya said. But even if it only changes one person's perspective or helps one family treat their caregiver with more dignity, it's worth it. As Lucia prepared to leave, she turned back one more time. The lady at the coffee shop. Mrs. Harrison's friend mentioned seeing Emma somewhere over the weekend. Small world, Portland. Maya felt a chill of curiosity. Oh? Emma told me they went to some family gathering in the West Hills. She said there were lots of adults talking about boring things, but she liked playing with her cousin. Lucia shrugged. I just thought it was interesting that these circles are smaller than we think. After Lucia left, Maya sat in the community center's quiet interview room, processing everything she'd heard. Rosa appeared in the doorway with 2 cups of tea. Heavy conversation? Rosa asked, settling into the chair Lucia had vacated. Very, Maya replied, accepting the warm cup gratefully. Rosa, can I ask you something? In all your years doing this work, have you seen things change? Do people become more aware? Rosa considered the question carefully. Change happens slowly, and often in ways we don't immediately see. 20 years ago, it was rare for immigrant workers to have any legal protections. Now, some cities have domestic worker bills of rights. 20 years ago, few people talked about the emotional labor that care work requires. Now, at least some families are having those conversations. She paused, sipping her tea. But there's still so much work to do. The fundamental issue is that we live in a society that devalues care work because it's traditionally been done by women, and especially women of color. Until we change that basic equation, individual acts of kindness, while important, can only go so far. Maya spent the rest of the day transcribing her interview with Lucia, but her mind kept returning to Rosa's words and to something Lucia had mentioned almost in passing, the family gathering in the West Hills where Emma had played with her cousin. That evening, Maya called her mother to check in, as she did every few days. The conversation started with the usual updates: her father's work, her mother's nursing shifts, Maya's progress on her thesis, but eventually turned to Maya's research. Mija, you sound tired, Elena observed. This work, it's taking something out of you. It's just hard, Mama, Maya admitted. Hearing these stories, seeing how little has changed since you went through similar things, sometimes I wonder if any of this makes a difference. Let me tell you something, Elena said, her voice taking on the firm tone Maya remembered from childhood lectures. When I was cleaning houses, feeling invisible, there were days I wanted to give up. But then someone would treat me with kindness, really see me, and it would give me strength to keep going. She paused. The research you're doing, the stories you're collecting, they matter because they make the invisible visible. Maybe not everyone will read your thesis, but some will. And maybe those people will treat their housekeepers or nannies differently. Maybe they'll teach their children differently. After hanging up, Maya felt a renewed sense of purpose, but also a growing urgency. The more she learned about the experiences of women like Lucia and Carmen, the more she wanted to do something immediate and concrete, not just academic. She opened her laptop and began writing, but instead of working on her thesis, she found herself drafting something different. An essay about the coffee shop encounter and what it had taught her about dignity, invisibility, and the power of small gestures. She wrote about Lucia's expertise being dismissed, about Emma's confused loyalty, about the way systemic inequality played out in the most mundane moments. As she wrote, an idea began to form. What if she could create a platform for these stories beyond her academic work? What if there was a way to connect the families who employed domestic workers with resources about fair treatment and respectful relationships? Maya's phone buzzed with a text from Sarah. How did the interview go? Want to talk about it? Instead of texting back, Maya called. Sarah, what do you know about community journalism? About creating digital platforms for underrepresented voices? Why? Sarah asked, instantly curious. Maya explained her idea, still forming as she spoke. What if there was a way to share these stories, anonymously, to protect people's jobs, but in a format that would reach the families who need to hear them? Not just academic research, but something more accessible? Sarah was quiet for a moment, thinking. You know, there are some interesting models for that kind of work. Community-based storytelling projects, digital archives of working-class experiences. It would take time and resources, but it's not impossible. They talked for an hour about possibilities, websites, podcast series, community workshops where families could learn about fair employment practices and domestic workers could share resources and support. By the end of the conversation, Maya felt energized in a way she hadn't since starting her thesis. But as She prepared for bed. Her mind drifted back to something Lucia had said about Emma's confusion, about a child trying to reconcile love for her caregiver with her mother's dismissive treatment. Maya thought about the family gathering Lucia had mentioned, about the small world of Portland's affluent families, and wondered if there were connections she hadn't yet considered. The next morning brought an unexpected email from Dr. Martinez. "Maya, I've been reviewing your recent work and I'm impressed by the evolution in your research focus. I'd like to schedule a meeting to discuss the possibility of presenting some of your findings at the Northwest Social Work Conference in December. Your work on dignity and recognition in domestic care relationships could contribute to important policy conversation." Maya stared at the email, feeling a mixture of excitement and pressure. A conference presentation would be a significant opportunity, but it would also mean distilling her research into a format that could influence actual policy. She thought about Carmen's words, about wanting to be seen for her strength, not just her struggles, and about Lucia's quiet dignity in the face of daily dismissals. As she walked to campus for her afternoon classes, Maya noticed things she'd never paid attention to before. The Latina women pushing strollers in wealthy neighborhoods, clearly caring for children who weren't their own, the way other pedestrians either ignored them completely or gave them a wide berth. The contrast between the children's obvious affection for their caregivers and the invisibility of the women in adult social spaces. Her urban sociology class that afternoon was discussing gentrification in Portland, and Maya found herself thinking about the intersection of her research with these broader patterns of displacement and economic inequality. The families who employed domestic workers were often the same ones driving up housing costs in formerly affordable neighborhoods, pushing working-class families further from the city center while simultaneously depending on their labor. After class, Maya stopped by the community center to update Rosa on her conversation with Dr. Martinez and her ideas about expanding beyond academic research. "It's funny you should mention that," Rosa said, settling into her familiar chair in the main room. "I got a call this morning from someone asking about domestic worker resources, a woman in the West Hills who said she wanted to make sure she was treating her nanny fairly." Maya's heart skipped. "What did you tell her?" "I invited her to come in for a conversation. She sounded genuinely interested in learning, not just checking a box." Rosa paused. She mentioned something interesting, though. She said her daughter had been asking questions about how they treat their caregiver, sparked by something that happened at a coffee shop. Maya felt her pulse quicken. "When is she coming in?" "Thursday afternoon." "I told her about your research, in general terms, and she expressed interest in learning more about the perspectives of domestic workers." Rosa studied Maya's face. "You think you know who this is?" "Maybe," Maya admitted. "If it's who I think it is, this could be complicated." Rosa nodded thoughtfully. "Or it could be exactly the kind of bridge building your research is pointing toward. Sometimes the most unexpected conversations lead to real change." That evening, Maya couldn't concentrate on her studying. She kept thinking about the possibility that Mrs. Harrison, Emma's mother, was the woman who had called Rosa. If so, what did that mean? Had Emma's questions actually gotten through to her? Was this genuine interest in change or damage control? She called Carmen, the first domestic worker she'd interviewed, to get her perspective. "These kinds of situations," Carmen said when Maya explained the scenario, "they can go either way. Sometimes families have a moment of awareness and really want to do better. Sometimes they just want to feel better about themselves without actually changing anything. How can you tell the difference?" "You listen to what they're willing to hear," Carmen replied. "If they want to learn about your experience and expertise, that's different from wanting to be reassured that they're not bad people. If they're asking how to change their behavior versus how to feel better about their behavior." Maya spent Wednesday evening preparing for the possibility of seeing Mrs. Harrison at the community center. She reviewed her notes from the coffee shop encounter, thought about Emma's questions and Lucia's responses, and considered what outcome would actually serve Lucia's interests best. But nothing could have prepared her for what actually happened when Thursday afternoon arrived. Thursday afternoon arrived grey and drizzly, typical October weather that made the community centre feel especially warm and welcoming. Maya arrived early, ostensibly to help Rosa with some administrative tasks, but really because she was too nervous to wait at home. She'd spent the previous evening questioning whether she should even be present for this meeting, worried about crossing ethical boundaries between her roles as researcher and witness to the coffee shop incident. "You should be here," Rosa had assured her during their phone conversation that morning. "If this is the same family, your presence might actually help. You've seen both sides of their dynamic." At exactly 2 o'clock, Maya heard car doors closing in the parking lot. Through the community center's front window, she watched a familiar blonde woman emerge from a silver Mercedes SUV, but she wasn't alone. Emma skipped alongside her mother, wearing the same purple unicorn t-shirt Maya remembered from the coffee shop, and behind them, both walked Lucia. Maya felt her stomach drop. Whatever she'd expected from this meeting, she hadn't anticipated all three of them coming together. Rosa greeted them at the door with her characteristic warmth, introducing herself to Mrs. Harrison while giving Emma and Lucia genuine smiles. "Thank you all for coming. I'm Rosa Gutierrez, and this is Maya Rodriguez, who's doing research on domestic worker experiences." Mrs. Harrison, who introduced herself as Jennifer Harrison, shook Maya's hand without any sign of recognition from their brief encounter at the coffee shop. She was dressed more casually than before, in dark jeans and a burgundy sweater, but she still carried herself with the careful composure of someone accustomed to being in control. "I appreciate you taking the time to meet with us," Jennifer said as they settled into the main room of the community center. "I want to make sure I'm being a good employer and that Emma learns to treat everyone with respect." Emma, meanwhile, had spotted a box of children's books in the corner and was already showing one to Lucia, chattering in a mixture of English and Spanish words. "Look, Lucia, this one has a princess who speaks 2 languages just like you." Maya watched Lucia's face soften as she looked at the book with Emma, then noticed Jennifer watching the interaction with an expression that was hard to read, part affection, part uncertainty. "What prompted you to reach out?" Rosa asked Jennifer gently. Jennifer glanced at Emma, who was absorbed in the book with Lucia, then back at Rosa and Maya. "Emma has been asking a lot of questions lately about fairness and how we treat people. She noticed that I don't always speak to Lucia the same way I speak to other adults, and she wanted to know why." Maya felt a flicker of hope. Emma's questions were continuing, despite her mother's previous attempts to shut them down. "And what did you tell her?" Maya asked. "Honestly, I didn't have a good answer," Jennifer admitted. "I realized I've been operating on assumptions without really thinking about Lucia as a person with her own expertise and perspective." Lucia looked up from the book she was sharing with Emma, clearly listening to the adult conversation while maintaining her attention on the child. Maya could see the tension in her posture, the careful balance of hope and caution that came from years of navigating unpredictable employer relationships. Rosa took the lead in guiding the conversation, asking Jennifer about her expectations for Lucia's role and her understanding of domestic worker rights. As Jennifer spoke, Maya began to see a more complex picture than the dismissive employer from the coffee shop incident. "I grew up in a house where we had help," Jennifer said, "but my parents never talked about it as employment. It was just part of the household. I realize now that I never learned how to think about domestic work as skilled labor that deserves respect and fair compensation." Emma looked up from her book. "Mama, is that why you were mean to Lucia at the coffee place?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. Jennifer's face flushed, and Maya realized that Emma had been processing the coffee shop incident for weeks, trying to understand the disconnect between her mother's behavior and her own feelings about Lucia. "I wasn't trying to be mean, sweetheart," Jennifer said carefully, "but I think I was unfair, and that's why we're here, to learn how to do better." Maya found herself speaking before she'd fully planned what to say. I was at that coffee shop, she said quietly. I saw the interaction. Jennifer turned to look at her more carefully, and Maya could see the moment of recognition dawning. You're the woman who gave Lucia your drink. Yes. I've been thinking about that day, Jennifer continued, her voice becoming smaller, about how my behavior must have looked to Emma, to Lucia, to everyone watching. I was treating Lucia like she didn't deserve the same consideration I'd give to anyone else. Lucia had been listening silently, but now she spoke, her voice calm but firm. Mrs. Harrison, can I say something? Jennifer nodded, and Maya noticed how she turned her full attention to Lucia in a way that felt different from their previous interactions. I've been working with children for 8 years, Lucia said. I have a degree in early childhood education from Mexico, and I understand child development, learning through play, emotional nurturing, but you've never asked me about my background or my ideas about Emma's growth. Maya watched Jennifer's face as she processed this information. I had no idea you had educational training. That's part of the problem, Rosa interjected gently. When we don't see domestic workers as whole people with expertise and history, we miss opportunities for true partnership in caring for children. Emma, who had been listening with the intense focus children bring to adult conversations they find important, suddenly stood up and walked over to Lucia. Lucia, will you teach me more Spanish words? I want to talk to you in both languages. Of course, mi amor, Lucia replied, then caught herself and glanced at Jennifer. If it's okay with your mama. Jennifer looked between Emma and Lucia, and Maya could see something shifting in her expression. I think that would be wonderful, she said. In fact, I'd like to learn some Spanish too if you'd be willing to teach me. As the conversation continued, Rosa guided them toward practical discussions about Lucia's working conditions, fair compensation, and professional development opportunities. Maya took notes, but found herself more interested in watching the dynamics between the three of them shift in real time. Jennifer learned that Lucia had a daughter in Mexico whom she was working to bring to the United States, that she sent money home to support her parents, and that she had dreams of eventually getting her teaching credentials recognized in the US. Emma absorbed every detail with fascination, asking Lucia questions about her daughter and whether they could video call her sometime. I want to make changes, Jennifer said as the formal part of the meeting began to wind down, but I need to understand what fair employment looks like. I don't want to just guess and get it wrong again. Rosa provided her with resources, information about Portland's Domestic Worker Bill of Rights, guidelines for fair scheduling and compensation, and contacts for other organizations that supported both employers and workers in building respectful relationships. There's something else, Jennifer said, glancing at Maya. The coffee shop incident has been bothering me for weeks, not just because of how I treated Lucia, but because of what Emma witnessed. I realized I was teaching her that some people matter less than others, which is the opposite of what I want her to learn. Emma, who had been coloring in a book Rosa had given her, looked up. Mama, does this mean Lucia can have big coffees now? The adults all laughed, breaking some of the tension that had built up during the more serious parts of the conversation. Yes, sweetheart, Jennifer said. Lucia can have whatever size coffee she wants. Good, Emma said matter-of-factly, returning to her coloring. Big people need big coffees when they're tired from taking care of little people. As they prepared to leave, Jennifer asked Maya about her research and whether she could read the final thesis when it was completed. I think other families like mine need to hear these perspectives, she said. We're not intentionally harmful, but ignorance isn't an excuse for unfairness. Lucia lingered as Jennifer and Emma walked to the car, turning back to Maya and Rosa. Thank you, she said simply. I wasn't sure this would go well, but I think things might actually change. How do you feel about it? Maya asked. Hopeful, Lucia replied, but also careful. Change has to be sustained, not just a moment of good intentions. Maya nodded, understanding the wariness. She'd seen enough in her research to know that meaningful change required consistent effort, not just awareness. After they left, Maya and Rosa sat in the community center's quiet main room, processing what had just happened. "Well, that was unexpected," Rosa said with a small smile. "Do you think it will stick?" Maya asked. "The changes Jennifer wants to make?" "Hard to say," Rosa replied. "But Emma is a powerful advocate for Lucia, and children have a way of holding adults accountable to their better selves." And Jennifer seemed genuinely shaken by seeing her own behavior reflected back through Emma's questions. That evening, Maya called Carmen to update her on the meeting and get her perspective on how it had unfolded. "You know what gives me hope about this story?" Carmen said after Maya had described the afternoon. "It's that the child was the catalyst. Emma saw unfairness and couldn't let it go. If more children grew up questioning those dynamics instead of accepting them..." "That's exactly what I keep thinking about," Maya replied. "How do we raise kids who maintain that sense of justice instead of learning to ignore inequality?" Maya spent the next few days incorporating the community center meeting into her thesis, but she also continued working on her ideas for broader community engagement. The encounter with Jennifer had reinforced her belief that many employers weren't intentionally cruel. They were operating within systems they'd never been taught to question. Dr. Martinez was enthusiastic about Maya's expanded research when they met on Monday. This development with the employer wanting to change her practices, it's exactly the kind of real-world application that makes academic research meaningful, he said. "I think you should definitely include this in your conference presentation." As Maya prepared her presentation over the following weeks, she found herself returning again and again to Emma's questions and natural sense of fairness. She thought about the power of children to disrupt adult complacency, about the importance of creating spaces where difficult conversations could happen safely, and about the ripple effects of small acts of recognition and dignity. 2 weeks after the community center meeting, Maya received a text from an unknown number. "Hi, this is Jennifer Harrison. I wanted to let you know that Lucia and I have had several good conversations about her role in our family, and I've given her a significant raise and more autonomy in Emma's care. Emma is learning Spanish and loves teaching me new words. Thank you for your research and for being kind to Lucia that day at the coffee shop. It started conversations that needed to happen." Maya showed the text to Sarah over dinner that evening. "So your random act of kindness actually created systemic change for one family," Sarah observed. "That's pretty amazing." "It wasn't just the coffee," Maya protested. "It was Emma's questions, Lucia's courage in participating in my research, Rosa's wisdom in facilitating the conversation, and your research creating a framework for understanding why these interactions matter," Sarah added. "Don't minimize your role in this, Maya." As Maya put the finishing touches on her thesis in November, she reflected on how much her understanding had evolved since that rainy October morning at the coffee shop. She'd set out to study systemic barriers facing immigrant families, but she discovered something more complex: the ways in which individual relationships could either reinforce or challenge those barriers, the power of children's moral clarity to disrupt adult assumptions, and the possibility of creating bridges between communities that rarely spoke to each other directly. Her thesis, Defense in December, went well, with committee members praising her integration of personal narratives with policy analysis. But Maya found herself more excited about the community workshop series she and Rosa were planning for the new year, monthly gatherings where domestic workers and employers could come together for education, resource sharing, and relationship building. At the conference presentation, Maya shared the story of the coffee shop encounter and its aftermath without using real names, framing it as an example of how small moments of recognition could catalyze larger conversations about dignity and fair treatment. During the Q&A, a social worker from Seattle asked about replicating the community center model in other cities. After the presentation, Maya was approached by a woman who introduced herself as a documentary filmmaker interested in stories about domestic workers and the families who employ them. I've been looking for a narrative that shows the possibility of change, the filmmaker said. Your research suggests there are entry points for transformation that we haven't fully explored. As Maya drove home from the conference, she thought about all the stories that had emerged from that single moment of offering her coffee to a stranger. Lucia's courage in sharing her experiences, Carmen's strength in surviving and thriving despite systemic barriers, Emma's moral clarity that refused to accept unfairness, and even Jennifer's willingness to confront her own behavior and make meaningful changes. That evening, Maya received another text, this one from Lucia. Maya, I wanted you to know that Mrs. Harrison helped me enroll in a program to get my teaching credentials recognized here. Emma is so excited that I might be her real teacher someday. Thank you for seeing me that day. Maya sat in her apartment, looking out at the Portland skyline twinkling in the winter darkness, and felt a deep sense of completion. Her thesis was finished, but the work it had inspired was just beginning. She thought about her mother's words about making the invisible visible, about Rosa's wisdom that change happened slowly and in ways we didn't always immediately see. As she prepared for bed, Maya opened her laptop one more time and began typing. Sometimes the most important research happens not in libraries or laboratories, but in the moments when we choose to see each other's full humanity. Sometimes the most powerful data comes not from surveys or statistics, but from a child's simple question. Why can't she have a big coffee too? The cursor blinked on the screen as Maya considered what came next. The thesis was complete, but the stories would continue. Tomorrow she would call Rosa about the workshop series. She would reach out to Carmen about participating in the documentary. She would continue the work of building bridges between communities, one conversation at a time. Outside her window, Portland slept under a blanket of winter stars, and somewhere in the city, Lucia was probably helping Emma with her homework, teaching her new Spanish words, and dreaming of the day her own daughter would join them in this country, built on the labor and love of women whose stories were finally beginning to be heard. Maya closed her laptop and smiled. The circle that had begun with a simple act of kindness at a coffee shop had expanded into something larger than she could have imagined, a network of connection, understanding, and hope that would continue growing long after her thesis was filed away in the university library. Some stories, she realized, never really end. They just become the beginning of new chapters, written by all the people whose lives they touch along the way. 6 months later, on a warm April morning in Portland, Maya stood in the familiar community center where so much had changed since that October day when she'd first interviewed Carmen. The space had been transformed for the quarterly Bridging Communities workshop, the program she and Rosa had developed to bring domestic workers and their employers together for education, support, and relationship building. Sunlight streamed through the windows, illuminating clusters of folding chairs arranged in circles rather than rows, creating an atmosphere of conversation rather than lecture. Maya wore a flowing navy dress that her mother had helped her pick out for occasions when she needed to feel both professional and approachable. In her hands, she held a folder containing the agenda for today's workshop, Understanding Child Development Through Cultural Exchange. Nervous? Rosa asked, approaching with 2 cups of coffee, a ritual they'd maintained since Maya's research days. Good nervous. Maya replied, accepting the warm cup. Look at this turnout. The room was filling with an unprecedented mix of people. Lucia sat near the front with Jennifer and Emma, who at 8 years old had become something of a youth ambassador for the program. Carmen was there with the family she'd started working for after leaving her previous employer. A kind, retired couple who treated her like the child development expert she was. Maria Santos, a house cleaner Maya had interviewed months earlier, sat with her employer, Dr. Patricia Nguyen, a pediatrician who had completely restructured their working relationship after attending the first workshop. But there were also new faces, women Maya didn't recognize, both workers and employers, drawn by word-of-mouth recommendations and a growing awareness in Portland's progressive community that these conversations mattered. Maya, Emma called out, bouncing over with the energy of a child who felt completely at home in this space. Lucia taught me how to say good morning in 5 different languages. Want to hear? Before Maya could respond, Emma launched into her demonstration. Buenos dias, bon dia, bonjour, and buongiorno. Lucia says Portland has nannies from all over the world, and we should learn to say hello to everyone. Maya felt her heart swell watching Emma's enthusiasm. The little girl who had once asked innocent questions about fairness had grown into a confident advocate for inclusion, largely due to Lucia's patient teaching and Jennifer's newfound commitment to raising a globally minded child. That's amazing, Emma, Maya said. Are you ready to help with today's workshop? Emma nodded seriously. Lucia and I are going to show everyone how learning 2 languages helps kids think better. We have pictures and everything. As the workshop began, Maya looked around the room and marveled at how the dynamics had evolved. In the early sessions, there had been visible tension, workers uncertain about speaking freely in front of employers defensive about their practices, everyone carefully polite but guarded. Now, 6 months in, she saw genuine relationships forming. Rosa took the microphone first, welcoming everyone in English and Spanish. Today, we're exploring how cultural exchange between caregivers and children creates richer learning environments for everyone. We'll hear from experts in child development, but more importantly, we'll hear from the people who live this reality every day. Dr. Sarah Chen, a developmental psychologist from Portland State who had become a regular workshop facilitator, spoke first about the cognitive benefits of multilingual exposure in early childhood. Maya watched the faces in the audience. Some employers looked surprised to learn that what they'd previously seen as potential confusion was actually intellectual enhancement. Then Lucia took the stage, her confidence visibly transformed from those early interviews. She wore a bright turquoise blouse and spoke with the authority of someone who had reclaimed her expertise. When I first came to this country, Lucia began, I was told to speak only English with Emma, that Spanish would confuse her development. But children's brains are designed to absorb multiple languages. By teaching Emma Spanish, I'm not just sharing my culture, I'm giving her cognitive advantages that will last her entire life. Emma jumped up from her seat, unable to contain her excitement. Can I show them, Lucia? With Lucia's encouraging nod, Emma launched into a demonstration that had clearly been practiced but retained the authenticity of a child's natural enthusiasm. She counted to 20 in both languages, then explained how learning Spanish had helped her understand patterns in English, words she'd never noticed before. And guess what? Emma continued, addressing the room full of adults with the confidence of someone accustomed to being taken seriously. When I learn Spanish words from Lucia, I remember them better than when I learn French words from my school teacher because Lucia uses them in real life. Jennifer stood up from her seat, and Maya could see the pride and slight wonder in her expression. A year ago, I was worried that Emma learning Spanish would hold back her English development, she said to the room. Now I see that Lucia wasn't just babysitting my daughter. She was providing her with an advanced education I never could have given her myself. Carmen raised her hand from the audience. Can I add something? At Rosa's nod, Carmen stood. I've been working with families for 15 years, and I want to tell the employers here something important. Your children love learning about our cultures, but they also sense how you treat us. If you respect our knowledge and expertise, they learn to value diversity. If you treat us as less than, they absorb those attitudes too. A new voice spoke up from the back. I'm struggling with this, said a woman Maya didn't recognize. She appeared to be in her 40s with short brown hair and the kind of carefully casual, expensive clothing that marked her as affluent. I mean, I want to do the right thing, but I also need clear boundaries. How do I respect my nanny's expertise without losing authority in my own home? Maya felt the room's energy shift. This was the kind of honest question that could either derail the conversation or deepen it, depending on how it was handled. Lucia exchanged a look with Jennifer before responding. Can I answer that? The woman nodded, looking grateful for direct engagement. Authority and respect aren't opposites, Lucia said thoughtfully. Mrs. Harrison is still Emma's mother, and she makes the final decisions about Emma's care. But now she asks for my input because she values my experience with children. When Emma misbehaves, we work together on solutions instead of Mrs. Harrison telling me what to do without context. Jennifer stood again. I think the key is shifting from "I employ you" to "we're partners in raising my child." Lucia knows things about child development that I don't. She also knows Emma's daily rhythms and responses in ways that I miss because I'm at work. When I started seeing Lucia as a collaborator instead of just hired help, everything improved. Dr. Chen jumped in with research to support the point. Studies consistently show that children thrive when the adults in their lives communicate and coordinate their approaches. This is true whether it's parents and teachers, parents and grandparents, or parents and caregivers. Maya watched the woman who'd asked the question nod slowly, clearly processing this information. Around the room, she could see other employers having similar moments of recognition. Maria Santos, the house cleaner, raised her hand next. I want to share something too, but about a different kind of work. Maya remembered Maria's story, a woman in her 50s who had been cleaning houses for a decade while raising 3 children as a single mother. She worked for Dr. Nguyen, the pediatrician, who had completely transformed their relationship after attending the workshops. I don't take care of children in my work, Maria began, but I take care of homes, and I see everything. I know when families are stressed, when someone is sick, when relationships are struggling. For years, families treated me like I was invisible, like I couldn't see or hear or understand what was happening around me. She gestured toward Dr. Nguyen, who smiled encouragingly. But Dr. Nguyen started asking for my observations. When her teenage son was going through a difficult time, she asked if I'd noticed changes in his behavior during the day. When her husband was stressed about work, she valued my perspective on how it was affecting the family dynamic. Dr. Nguyen stood up. Maria sees my family for 8 hours a week when I'm not there. She has insights I would never have access to otherwise. Once I started treating her as a household consultant instead of just someone who cleaned, our whole family benefited. Maya felt a familiar surge of emotion watching these relationships evolve in real time. She thought about her mother, who had cleaned houses for years while being treated as invisible, and wondered how different those experiences might have been if she'd encountered employers like Dr. Nguyen. As the formal presentations concluded, Rosa announced the breakout sessions, where small groups would discuss specific scenarios and challenges. Maya circulated between groups, listening to conversations that would have been impossible 6 months earlier. In one corner, she heard a heated but respectful discussion about vacation policies and sick leave. Lucia was explaining to a group of employers why domestic workers needed the same job protections as office workers, while Jennifer shared the practical adjustments she'd made to accommodate Lucia's needs without disrupting her family's routine. In another circle, Carmen was leading a conversation with newer domestic workers about advocating for themselves professionally. You have to remember, she was saying, you're not asking for charity. You're professionals providing skilled services, and you deserve to be treated as such. Emma had found her way to a group of younger children who had come with their parents, and Maya was delighted to see her teaching them basic Spanish phrases and explaining why it was super cool to have a caregiver from another country. But the conversation that caught Maya's attention most strongly was happening near the windows, where the woman who had asked about boundaries was speaking with Rosa and 2 other employers. I think my real fear, the woman was saying, is that if I treat my nanny too much like family, the professional relationship will break down. But listening to everyone today, I'm wondering if my definition of professional is actually just impersonal. Rosa nodded thoughtfully. There's a difference between maintaining appropriate boundaries and maintaining emotional distance. You can be warm, respectful, and personally invested in your caregiver's well-being while still being clear about expectations and responsibilities. One of the other employers, a father Maya recognized from previous workshops, jumped in. It took me a while to figure this out, but treating our nanny professionally actually means acknowledging her expertise and compensating her fairly, not keeping her at arm's length emotionally. My kids love her, and that's exactly what I want. As the workshop concluded, Maya found herself in conversation with several participants who wanted to share their experiences or ask for additional resources. The energy in the room was different from those early sessions, less cautious, more genuine, with visible relationships forming across traditional employer-worker divides. Lucia approached Maya as people began gathering their things. "I have news," she said, her face glowing with excitement. "Good news, I hope." "The best news. My daughter Sophia got her visa approved. She'll be here in 6 weeks." Maya felt tears spring to her eyes. "Lucia, that's wonderful. How are you feeling?" "Overwhelmed, happy, scared." Lucia laughed, wiping at her own eyes. "Mrs. Harrison has offered to help us find a good high school for Sophia, and Emma is already planning to teach her English slang." Jennifer joined them, overhearing the last part of the conversation. "We're all so excited to meet Sophia. Emma has been practicing her Spanish specifically so she can help Sophia feel welcome." As Maya watched Jennifer and Lucia talk about practical arrangements for Sophia's arrival, school enrollment, medical care, social activities, she was struck by how naturally they collaborated now. The woman who had once treated Lucia as invisible was now genuinely invested in her family's well-being. After most people had left, Maya helped Rosa clean up while debriefing the day's session. "This was our best workshop yet," Rosa observed, stacking chairs. "The conversations felt deeper, more honest. I keep thinking about what Carmen said about children absorbing how we treat the people who care for them," Maya replied. "Emma is growing up seeing Lucia as a valued expert and cultural mentor instead of just hired help. That's going to shape how she treats service workers for the rest of her life." Rosa paused in her cleaning to look at Maya. "You know what I think the real success of this program is? It's not just changing individual relationships. It's creating a model that other communities can replicate. Word is spreading to other cities." Maya had heard similar feedback. Social workers from Seattle, San Francisco, and even as far away as Boston had reached out about implementing similar programs. The documentary filmmaker who had approached Maya after her conference presentation was planning to feature the Portland workshops as an example of grassroots community building. As they finished cleaning, Maya's phone buzzed with a text from Emma. "Maya, can you come to dinner next week? Lucia is teaching Mama how to make mole, and I want to show you my Spanish homework." Maya smiled, typing back her acceptance. The little girl, who had sparked this entire journey with her innocent questions about fairness, had become one of its most enthusiastic champions. That evening, Maya drove home through Portland's spring green neighborhoods, past parks where nannies pushed children on swings and couples walked dogs and teenagers played pickup basketball. She thought about all the invisible relationships that made this city function. The domestic workers who cared for children and elderly parents, the house cleaners who maintained comfortable homes, the gardeners who created beautiful spaces. 6 months ago, most of these relationships had been characterized by economic necessity rather than mutual respect. Now, at least in some corners of the city, that was beginning to change. Maya's phone rang as she pulled into her driveway. Her mother's name appeared on the screen. "Hola, mija." Elena's warm voice filled the car. "How was your workshop today?" As Maya described the day's conversations and breakthroughs, she could hear the pride in her mother's responses. "You know what makes me happiest about all this?" Elena said when Maya finished. "It's that you found a way to honor our stories while creating change for the future." After hanging up, Maya sat in her car for a few extra minutes, watching the sun set behind Portland's West Hills. She thought about Lucia's daughter preparing to join her mother in a new country, about Emma growing up with a global perspective and deep respect for cultural diversity, about the ripple effects that would continue long after the workshops ended. Her thesis had been filed away in the university library, but the real research continued every day in the relationships being transformed by recognition, respect, and genuine human connection. Tomorrow, Maya would start preparing for next month's workshop on fair compensation and professional development. She would continue building bridges between communities that had too long remained separate. But tonight, she would call Sarah and tell her about Emma's invitation to dinner, about Lucia's daughter's visa approval, about the employer who was learning to see professional boundaries and personal warmth as complementary rather than contradictory. Maya finally got out of her car and walked toward her apartment, past the cherry tree in her yard that was heavy with spring blossoms. She thought about seeds, how her simple act of offering coffee to a stranger had grown into something none of them could have anticipated, how Emma's questions had become catalysts for family transformation, how individual moments of dignity and recognition could accumulate into systemic change. Some seeds took months or years to sprout, but when they did, they could transform entire landscapes. As Maya unlocked her front door, she smiled, knowing that tomorrow would bring new opportunities to plant more seeds, to nurture more relationships, to continue the ongoing work of creating a community where everyone's humanity was seen and valued. The story that had begun with a child's simple question, "Why can't she have a big coffee too?" had become something larger than any of them had imagined, and it was far from over.